The Golden Room was the most beautiful prison in the Vale estate. No one called it a prison. That was the first thing Dante Cross noticed when he was assigned to stand outside it. The briefing had used words like protection, isolation, precaution. The briefing had not used the word prison, but Dante had been a bodyguard for 11 years, and one of the things 11 years of standing outside rooms taught you was the difference between a door that kept danger out and a door that kept people in. He checked the door. The lock was on the outside. There was no handle on the inside. There was no emergency release. There was no bell that rang somewhere useful. There was a speaking grate at eye level, ornamental iron, the kind that was supposed to look like it was for ventilation. He noted all of this. He stood at his post. He had his orders. Inside the Golden Room, Isabella Vale was standing at the window that looked out over the estate's southern garden. The garden had roses. She could see them. She could not reach them. The Golden Room had been designed with great care to make that distinction invisible. Every surface said, "You are comfortable." The silk of the curtains said, "You are honored." The crystal chandelier said, "You are important." The white flowers said, "You are remembered." The tea said, "You are provided for." None of these things said, "You are free." None of these things said, "The door opens from the inside." None of these things said, "When you want to leave, you may." The Golden Room had been in the Vale estate for 3 generations. In 3 generations, it had held 6 women. None of them had been charged with a crime in a courtroom. All of them had simply been placed here, in this beautiful room, until the relevant moment passed and their silence had been interpreted as whatever the family needed it to be. The garden had roses. She could see them. She could not reach them. The room itself was exactly what people said it was. Silk curtains, crystal chandelier, fresh white flowers in a vase on the dressing table, a bed larger than most rooms she had slept in before she married into this family, a writing desk with heavy stationery, and tea on a lacquered tray. Beautiful. Every arrangement in it was beautiful. That was the second thing Dante noticed when Isabella's voice came through the grate. She did not sound afraid. She sounded precise. She said, "If I was truly guilty, why are they more afraid of me speaking than escaping?" Dante did not answer. His orders were to not engage. But his eyes went to the lock, and for the first time since he had taken this post 3 hours ago, he thought about the difference between those 2 things. Afraid of her speaking, afraid of her escaping, those were not the same fear. Lucien Vale had given the briefing himself. He had been calm. He had been reasonable. He had used the word tragic multiple times in describing the situation. He said Isabella had been seen accessing the family's secure communication channel. He said the logs showed a message sent to the Ferrara network, the Vale family's primary rival, containing a shipping route that only someone with internal access could have known. He said the evidence had been reviewed by 2 council members before he brought it forward. He said he did not want to believe it. He said that was why he had recommended Golden Room instead of a formal hearing, because a formal hearing would require the evidence to be read into the record, and the scandal would be unavoidable. He said, "I am not locking her away. I am keeping the family from tearing her apart before Adrian returns." He said it with the expression of a man who was doing the difficult, responsible thing. Dante had watched him say it. He had sat through many briefings. He had sat through briefings given by men who were angry, men who were afraid, men who were performing concern for a room they had already decided about, and men who had rehearsed what they were about to say enough times that the delivery had the smoothed quality of a thing that had been worn down to its optimal shape. Lucien's delivery had that quality. It was not the smoothness of a man who was comfortable with a difficult situation. It was the smoothness of a man who had been comfortable with this specific situation before he was asked to speak about it. Men who were doing the difficult, responsible thing did not usually arrive in the briefing with documents already prepared. Lucien had the documents already prepared. He had the footage. He had the communication log. He had the timeline. He had the recommendation for Golden Room already drafted. A man who was reacting to a revelation did not have all of those things prepared. A man who had arranged for the revelation to happen did. Dante had watched him say it. He had noted the expression. He had noted the specific quality of calm in it. Men who were doing the difficult, responsible thing did not usually look quite that calm. He went back to his post. He thought about what Isabella had asked. He checked the door again, more carefully this time. No inside handle. Isabella said through the grate, not loud, "This room was never built to hold me. It was built to make my silence look voluntary. No emergency release, no bell, and one more thing he had not noticed before. A small panel behind the dressing mirror, not visible from the room, visible only from the frame if you knew to look. A camera housing." He stood at his post and did not move. But he had started to think. Isabella Vale called the full council that evening. She was the oldest member, the keeper of family law, and she explained the silent consort clause with the efficiency of someone who had explained it before and expected to explain it again. She said, "If the wife of a Vale boss was accused of betrayal and failed to appear before the council within 24 hours, her silence could be recorded as consent." She said it without emphasis, which was how people said things they wanted to sound neutral. Dante stood at the edge of the room and listened. He did the arithmetic. The accusation had been brought at noon. The council session was scheduled for the following morning. That was 18 hours. Isabella had been in the Golden Room since noon. The Golden Room lock, he had noticed, was on a timer. He had checked the mechanism when he came on shift. The release was set for 2 hours after the asset division session. Not before. After. He said quietly, "A locked door cannot be consent." Marcella looked at him. She said, "It can if the law says she was given a choice." Dante looked at the door at the end of the hallway. He understood now what the Golden Room was for. It was not for keeping Isabella safe. It was for keeping Isabella late. The first signal came 2 hours into his shift. He heard water. Not a lot of water. A small amount, moving across a floor. He looked through the grate. The flower vase on the dressing table had been tipped. Water was spreading across the surface, running to the edge, dripping down the wall. In the wet streak where it had run, something was visible. A thin line in the plaster behind the mirror. Not a crack, a seam. The camera housing was not decorative. It was operational. The room was being recorded. Isabella could not tell him this directly because anything she said was being recorded. So she had shown him. He filed it. He said nothing. The second signal was the T. An hour later, a household servant brought in a second tray. She exchanged it for the first. Dante watched. When she left, he looked at the discarded tray through the grate. The tea had been poured, not drunk. Most of it was in the cup. But some was on the carpet, deliberately. He leaned close to the grate. Isabella said, very quietly, in the specific tone of someone speaking for an audience they were not addressing, "The tea in this room always makes me tired. I have trouble with my voice when I drink it." It was not a complaint. It was a statement made for the recording. Dante straightened. He understood. Whatever was in the tea would not harm her seriously. It would make her tired. It would make her voice unsteady. It would make her look, before a council, like a woman who was fragile, emotional, possibly unstable. If the clause required her to appear, she would appear, but she would appear sounding wrong. And a woman who sounded wrong was a woman the council could decide was not credible. Then Isabella said, in the same quiet conversational tone, "Look at what they gave me before they asked what I had done." Dante looked through the grate to the writing desk. On it was a document. He could see it from the grate. He could see it was formal, pre-printed, with Isabella's name already typed at the top. He could see the title, "Notice of Voluntary Relinquishment of Claim," he said, very quietly. "They prepared the papers before they accused you," Isabella said. Then the accusation was not the reason, it was the key. He found the charge document 2 hours later. He had not gone looking for it. It had been left in the duty folder on the guard station desk, placed there for him to find, a financial transfer record, dated 3 weeks ago, from a secondary account registered to Isabella Vale, to an account associated with his own name from 7 years back, an account he had not used since leaving his previous post. He looked at it for a long time. He knew what it was. He also knew what it meant. If he broke his orders, Lucien Vale would present this document. He would say Dante had been paid. He would say Dante had been compromised. He would say Isabella's bodyguard was her accomplice, which meant everything Isabella said came from a coordinated plan rather than the truth. The trap was elegant. If he followed orders, Isabella lost her rights. If he broke orders without proof, he became the scandal. He needed the proof first. He went back to his post. He thought about what he knew. He thought about what he had seen. He thought about his mother, who had worked for 15 years in the Carrara household and had been placed in a protective room after she found a discrepancy in an estate account. The record said she had voluntarily stepped back from her position. He had been 14. He had known she did not leave voluntarily. The record said voluntary. He had spent the next 20 years learning to be very good at his job so that the record was not written wrong again. He had not always succeeded. He had not always had the evidence in time. But he understood now, standing outside the Golden Room with a document that was meant to destroy his credibility, that this was the moment the 20 years had been preparing him for. He had been 14. He had known she did not leave voluntarily. He had spent years knowing it and not having the language for it. He looked at the Golden Room door. He had the language now. Adrian Vale returned before midnight. Lucien had prepared for this. He brought his brother to the study and laid everything out in order. The communication logs, the footage of Isabella at the terminal, the financial discrepancy in her accounts, the relinquishment document which he described as a precaution, unsigned, that we prepared in case she chose to cooperate. The behavioral report from the household staff about Dante speaking to Isabella through the grate. Adrian did not speak for a long time. He had been in a negotiation for 3 days. He had come back to his estate expecting the specific exhaustion of a man who had finished difficult work and now needed his home to be what homes were supposed to be. He had come back expecting Isabella. He had not expected this room, these documents, his brother's careful voice, and the weight of a decision that kept getting larger the longer he looked at the table. He knew Isabella. He knew her the way you knew a person after 6 years. Not perfectly, not without argument, but in the specific way of having shared enough ordinary mornings to know what she looked like when she was afraid versus when she was being careful, and how she reacted to injustice versus how she reacted to being caught. He knew Isabella, and something in the room was wrong. He could not identify what. The documents were specific. The footage was clear. Lucien was calm. Something was wrong. He was tired, and he was in his own estate, and he told himself that tired men saw shadows in well-lit rooms. Adrian did not speak for a long time. He had been in a negotiation for 3 days. He was tired. He loved Isabella. He also trusted Lucien, who had run the estate in his absence for 4 years and had never given him a reason to doubt that trust. Lucien said, "Brother, I am trying to save you from choosing love over the family." Adrian said nothing. Lucien played the audio file. It was Isabella's voice. She said, "I gave them what they wanted." The room went quiet. Adrian looked at the device. Dante, standing at the edge of the room where he had been brought to be questioned, said, "Play the rest of it." Lucien said there was no rest. Dante said, "There are always 3 knocks when Isabella wants me to look more carefully at something. She knocked 3 times before that recording was played, so I am asking, play the rest of it." The room was still. Lucien's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Dante looked at Adrian. He said, "The full sentence is, I gave them what they wanted to hear, so they would stop watching the wrong door." Adrian looked at his brother. He said, "Play the full recording." Lucien said the full recording was not relevant. Adrian said, "That is the second time in this conversation you have decided what is relevant for me. Play the full recording." The full recording changed the shape of the room. It did not prove everything, but it proved the cut. And a recording that had been cut was a recording that had been chosen. Dante laid out the rest while Lucien was still constructing his response. He said the door of the Golden Room had no internal release mechanism. He said the lock timer was set for 2 hours after the asset session. He said the tea had been replaced twice with a formulation that created fatigue and vocal instability. He said the relinquishment document had been dated and pre-printed before the accusation was filed. He said there was a camera behind the mirror that no one had told Isabella about. He said the financial transfer to his old account had been generated at the same time as the accusation, not before it. He put the transfer record on the desk. He said, "This was made to use against me if I protected her. It was not payment, it was a leash." Lucien said Dante was a bodyguard presenting speculation. He's the accusation against Isabella stood. He said the financial transfer record proved Dante had received payment from Isabella's account. He said that meant Dante was not a witness. He said Dante was a co-conspirator, and that bodyguard testimony obtained through financial arrangement was inadmissible under Vale Council procedure. He said this smoothly. He said it in the tone of someone who had prepared for this exact moment. He looked at Marcella. He said, "Dismiss the bodyguard's testimony. Declare her absent. Close the session." He was 2 votes from winning. Marcella did not speak immediately. The room waited. Isabella said then, "Let the original transfer metadata speak instead." She did not look at Dante. She said, "The transfer was created on the same day as the accusation, the same hour, from a machine that has never been associated with my accounts. If this council is interested in what the records say rather than what they were told to say, the metadata is available right now." The room was very still. Dante put the document on the table. The council session would proceed. The 24-hour window was still running. He looked at Dante. He said, "You are relieved of this post." He looked at the 2 men behind him. He said, to them specifically, not to Dante, "Seal the golden room. If she cannot appear before the session ends, the law decides for her." He said it quietly. He said it the way men said things that were supposed to sound like policy, but were actually instructions to commit something. Dante heard the footsteps. He heard the 2 men start down the hallway. He did not move. He had made his decision 3 minutes earlier in the archive room. He had found Marcella's note. He had found his mother's name. He had stood in the archive room for 30 seconds and let the weight of the thing he had been carrying for 20 years become something he could set down, not by dropping it, but by placing it where it could be used. He had walked back to this room. He had the charge document. He had the communication log metadata. He had the lock timer record. He had the audio cut. He had the predated relinquishment papers. He had the camera housing specifications showing active recording. He had enough. The 24-hour window had 11 minutes left. The council session was already in progress. He had enough, and he had 11 minutes, and he had one decision. He said, "My order was to guard you." Isabella had said, when he first pushed back against his orders, "Then guard me from the people who locked the door." He had not forgotten it. He said it now to Adrian. He said, guarding her from the wrong people was always part of that order. He looked at the door that led back to the hallway. He said, "She is going to be declared absent by consent in 11 minutes unless she appears before the council. I would like your permission to escort her there." Adrian looked at his brother's expression, very still, managing something underneath. He looked at Lucien's expression, the specific stillness of a man calculating whether careful was still enough. It was not. He said, "Dante, open the door." Isabella did not run when the door opened. She walked. She had been ready. She had been ready since she was brought here, because she had understood from the beginning what the room was for and had spent 12 hours preparing to be in the room with as little of its intended effect as possible. She had not drunk the tea. She had not signed the document. She had not raised her voice. She had used the room against itself. She walked into the council chamber with 9 minutes remaining. She had been in the golden room for 14 hours. She had not eaten the food, because the food might have been the same as the tea. She had not signed the document, because the document was the mechanism. She had not raised her voice against the walls, because the walls were recording. She had spent 14 hours being exactly what the room was designed to prevent: awake, clear, and in possession of every fact she needed. She had made one concession to the room. She had let it make her appear very calm. She had decided that calm was not a weakness if the person wearing it understood the situation better than everyone in the room they were walking into. She walked into the council chamber with 9 minutes remaining. She put the relinquishment document on the table, face up. She let it sit there. She let every person in the room look at it. She let them see her name on it. She let them see that it had been prepared, printed, dated, and placed in her room before she had any opportunity to understand what she was being asked to consent to. She said, "No, I was locked away. There is a difference." Lucien stood. He had prepared for this possibility. He had prepared for the possibility that Dante would break orders. He had prepared for the possibility that Isabella would be present. He had not prepared for what she brought with her. He had not prepared for the full communication log showing the origin device. He had not prepared for the audio restoration. He had not prepared for Dante to have a clean provenance trail on every piece of evidence. He said she had broken her isolation. He said she had used her bodyguard as an accomplice. He said the document proved. Isabella said, "A process that needs my silence was never built to find the truth." She turned to Marcella. She said, "The document was prepared before the accusation. The recording was cut. The tea was medicated. The lock was set to release after the session. Every element of this was designed for one outcome. My absence at the moment my testimony mattered." She placed a secondary document on the table. It was the original communication log, the full version, showing the metadata of the message that had allegedly been sent from her account. The origin device was not registered to her. It was registered to the secondary office in the East Wing, the office that Lucien used when Adrian was abroad. She said, "If I was dangerous, you should have let me speak and prove it. You locked me away because the danger was what I knew." The room was quiet. Lucien said one more thing. He said the bodyguard was compromised. He said the financial record. Dante put the original transfer metadata on the table beside Isabella's document. The transfer had been created on the same day as the accusation, same hour. The account it was sent to had been dormant for 7 years. It had not been accessed since before Dante worked for the Vale family. It was not payment. It was furniture. Something to point at when the story needed a villain who was not Lucien. Marcella looked at the documents. She looked at the table for a long time. She said, "We called it sanctuary because the walls were beautiful. We forgot to ask who held the key." Adrian Vale ordered Lucien detained before the council had finished reading. He did it without hesitation, which was the first thing he had done in this room without hesitation. But Isabella did not look at Adrian when she finished speaking. She looked at the window. She waited. Adrian came to stand beside her. He said, "I thought the room was keeping you safe." She said, "Safe people are allowed to leave." He was quiet. He said, "I did not lock the door. But I built the house that allowed it." She turned. She looked at him the way she had looked at the Golden Room's camera, directly, without performance, with the specific clarity of someone who had spent 12 hours in a room that ran on other people's assumptions and had emerged from it with none of them left intact. She said, Do not mistake tonight for forgiveness. You corrected a law. You have not yet repaired what it cost." She paused. She said, "Then build a different house, and do not ask me to feel safe in it until you have replaced every lock." He signed 5 laws before the session closed. No wife of the family was to be placed in isolation without first speaking before the council. No protection room was to be locked from outside without an internal release. No silence was to be recorded as consent while the person was being prevented from appearing. No bodyguard of a Vale wife was to be removed from post during an active investigation without full council review. No estate fund was to be controlled by another family branch without the direct signature of its designated holder before an independent witness. He signed all 5, not as a gift, as a debt. Dante was called before Adrian last. Adrian said, "You disobeyed me." Dante said, "No, I obeyed the only part of my order that mattered. I protected her." Adrian looked at him. He said, "The post is yours for as long as you want it." Dante did not say thank you. He nodded. He went back to the hallway. The door to the golden room was open. Someone had taken the lock off the outside. He looked in. The flower vase had been refilled. The camera housing behind the grate was gone. The writing desk had nothing on it. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about his mother. He thought about the difference between not knowing and choosing not to ask. Then Isabella Vale walked past him into the room and stood at the window. She looked at the garden. The roses were still there. She could reach them now. She said, to no one in particular, to the room, to the 12 hours she had spent inside it. A cage does not become kinder because it shines. She turned. She walked out. She did not look back. Dante stood in the doorway. He had spent 20 years learning to stand in doorways like this one. He had spent 20 years trying to be in the right place at the right time with the right information. He had not always succeeded. He had succeeded tonight. He looked at the open door. He thought about his mother's record. He thought about the word voluntary and what it had meant in her file and what it had cost her and what it had cost him. He thought about Marcella's note, inconclusive, no further action. He thought about what Marcella had said in the council chamber when the documents were laid out. We called it sanctuary because the walls were beautiful. We forgot to ask who held the key. He thought that was not the full truth. They had not forgotten. They had chosen not to ask. That was the difference. He closed the door of the golden room from the inside. He opened it again from the inside. He did it 3 times. Then he left it open and walked away. She did not look back. Isabella Vale was locked in a room made of gold and accused of betraying the family. But Dante Cross looked at the door and saw what everyone else had been taught to ignore. It did not open from the inside. By dawn, the Vale family learned a rule every empire should fear. A golden room is still a prison. Silence is not consent, and no woman should have to disappear just because powerful men are afraid to let her speak.